The Day of Atonement, the Yom Kippur War, Part 1. The sun hung low over the Sinai Desert on the afternoon of 6 October 1973, scattering gold across the dunes and glinting off the barbed wire and fortifications of the Bar-Lev line. Israeli soldiers stationed along the canal were finishing their Yom Kippur fast, opening cans of tuna, tearing pieces of bread, and trying to enjoy the quiet before the evening prayers. Synagogues in Tel Aviv, Haifa, and Jerusalem overflowed with worshippers, while the streets were almost deserted. For the state of Israel, 6 years of uneasy calm had bred overconfidence. In 1967, the country had struck lightning fast in the Six-Day War, taking the Sinai Peninsula from Egypt, the Golan Heights from Syria, and the West Bank from Jordan. The stunning victory had convinced Israel that its military supremacy was unassailable. Yet, in the shadows of those years, Arab nations had not forgotten. Egypt, humiliated and determined, had rebuilt its army, and Syria, humiliated by the loss of the Golan Heights, waited for the opportunity to strike back. By 1970, after the death of President Gamal Abdel Nasser, Egypt had quietly rearmed under the leadership of Anwar Sadat, who took pains to give the appearance of restraint. He expelled thousands of Soviet advisors in a dramatic public move, but secretly continued to amass weapons, build bridges for amphibious crossings, and train his troops to fight an Israeli army they could never confront head-on in a fair fight. Israel, observing from the north side of the canal, saw only the shadow of preparation and assumed war would not come. Golda Meir, the Israeli prime minister, chain-smoked in the early morning hours, reviewing the daily intelligence reports while trying to ignore the growing unease. Defense Minister Moshe Dayan, legendary from the battles of 1967, adjusted his eye patch in the mirror and muttered doubts to those who would listen. Chief of Staff David Elazar pushed for mobilization drills, but the government hesitated. The nation's doctrine, later referred to as the concept, assumed that Egypt would not attack without first achieving air superiority, which intelligence suggested it could not. Yet the Egyptians had planned meticulously. Their engineers fitted high-pressure water cannons to barges and pontoons, ready to blast through Israeli sand embankments. Artillery and infantry would cross simultaneously, supported by surface-to-air missile batteries that could blind the Israeli Air Force. Across the Golan Heights, Syrian President Hafez al-Assad coordinated a simultaneous offensive to retake lost territory. By October 1973, 2 fronts were being prepared in secret. On the afternoon of 6 October, Yom Kippur, the holiest day of the Jewish calendar, was observed with solemnity. Many Israeli soldiers were on leave, attending services, fasting, and praying. Others patrolled quietly along the Suez and the Golan. Then, precisely at 13:55 hours, the ground shook. A deafening roar erupted across the Suez Canal as 2,000 Egyptian artillery pieces unleashed a barrage of fire on Israeli positions. The earth convulsed, sandbags ripped apart, and the sky was a haze of smoke and dust. Simultaneously, Syrian forces opened their own offensive along the Golan Heights, firing missiles and pounding Israeli fortifications. The quiet of the holiest day was shattered. Israeli tank crews scrambled, many still in prayer shawls, as radio messages crackled frantic warnings to headquarters. In Cairo, Sadat observed the assault from his war room, eyes flicking across the screens showing pontoon bridges and infantry advancing across the canal. "This is the day we reclaim honor for Egypt," he said to his generals. In Damascus, Assad's aides pored over maps showing Israeli positions and troop deployments, coordinating armored thrusts toward the Sea of Galilee. By the end of the first hour, Egyptian forces had established 5 bridgeheads across the canal. Engineer battalions moved quickly under fire, hauling assault rifles, RPGs, and anti-tank missiles. High-pressure water cannons tore open the sand walls of Israeli defenses with shocking efficiency. Israeli units, initially stunned, radioed frantically for reinforcements. In the north, Syrian armored brigades rolled down the Golan Heights, facing smaller Israeli units that attempted to delay them, but were rapidly being overwhelmed. As night fell, the scale of the disaster became clear. Israel's myth of invincibility, built on the triumphs of 1967, had been shattered within hours. Along the Golan Front, approximately 177 Israeli tanks faced over 1,400 Syrian tanks in the first engagements. On the Sinai, the Bar-Lev Line's fortifications were overrun in multiple sectors. Soldiers dug in for a night of defense and counterattacks, knowing that the coming days would determine the survival of the state. Amid the chaos, Israel scrambled its reserve forces. Black buses roared down empty streets, picking up men who had been attending prayers or preparing for holidays. Families clutched radios, waiting for news from the front. The nation's entire military apparatus, once peacetime in its readiness, shifted into full war mode within hours. In the Golan, a small group of Israeli tank commanders performed acts of extraordinary courage. Zivika Greengold, a young reserve officer, drove a single tank into the path of dozens of Syrian T-62s, delaying their advance long enough for reinforcements to arrive. On the Sinai front, officers like Amnon Reshef organized paratroopers in desperate counterattacks to slow Egyptian bridges and buy time for Israeli divisions to mobilize. The Egyptian crossing itself was a marvel of planning. Over 200,000 soldiers moved across the water, using pontoons and inflatable boats, while artillery barrages and SAM batteries shielded them from Israeli air attacks. High-pressure water cannons, previously thought to be an oddity, blasted through the fortified sand walls of the Bar-Lev Line, creating holes large enough for armored vehicles to pass. Egyptian engineers sacrificed themselves to hold bridges in place under fire, and infantry flooded eastward to secure territory. On the Syrian front, the fighting was just as brutal. On the basaltic slopes of the Golan, Israeli paratroopers attempted to delay the advance of Syrian divisions. Overwhelmed in both numbers and firepower, they held key positions at a cost of heavy casualties. By the second day, the Syrians had captured some high ground, but Israeli reserve brigades began to arrive, slowly stabilizing the lines. In Tel Aviv, Golda Meir convened emergency meetings with cabinet ministers and military leaders. "We are fighting for our survival," she said, a statement echoed by the tense expressions in the room. Moshe Dayan flew to the front to inspect the situation personally, his normally confident demeanor shadowed by concern. David Elazar, coordinating from command centers, issued orders for counterattacks on both fronts. By October 8, the first counteroffensives began. On the Golan Heights, Israeli forces pushed back Syrian tanks in fierce engagements near the northern slopes, slowly reclaiming lost territory. On the Sinai, initial counterattacks failed as Egyptian forces consolidated bridgeheads and deployed anti-tank defenses. It was becoming clear that the war would not be over in a few days. Meanwhile, the international stage stirred. The United States, watching the conflict unfold, began planning an airlift of supplies and equipment to Israel. The Soviet Union mobilized support for Egypt and Syria. Diplomats in New York and Washington nervously predicted escalation that could draw the superpowers into direct confrontation. Back on the front lines, human stories unfolded with intensity. Young Israeli reservists, called up from farms, schools, and offices, braved artillery fire and advancing armored columns. Soldiers wrote hurried letters to families, many knowing that the next day could be their last. Egyptian and Syrian soldiers also displayed extraordinary courage, facing fierce counterattacks and sometimes dying for territory whose symbolic significance was as great as the strategic. By the third day of the war, the initial shock had given way to a grim determination on both sides. Israel's high command had realized that the early overconfidence was a mistake, and that the country's very survival hung on the ability to mobilize and respond quickly. On the Sinai front, Israeli planners, including Ariel Sharon, were already devising counteroffensives to breach Egyptian positions and threaten the rear of their forces. Across the Golan, the battle lines stabilized. Reinforcements arrived, tanks and artillery were repositioned, and Israeli commanders prepared for a series of counterattacks that would push Syrian forces back toward pre-war positions. Despite the chaos, the country's logistical systems functioned, sending fuel, ammunition, and medical aid to the front. The Yom Kippur War had begun in fury. In less than 72 hours, it had shattered illusions, tested courage, and forced every participant, soldier and civilian alike, into a struggle that would determine not only the outcome of the war, but the future of the Jewish state itself. The first hours had shown both the power of meticulous planning and the unpredictable chaos of combat. Now, as night fell on October 8, 1973, the real struggle, the desperate, bloody, heroic battles that would define the Yom Kippur War, was only beginning. The fourth day of the war, October 9, 1973, dawned over Israel with a tense, uneasy quiet. In the north, the Golan Heights were a battlefield of fire and smoke. Israeli forces, battered and outnumbered, had managed to stabilize the front lines, but their positions were precarious. Syrian tanks, resupplied overnight, pressed forward, while artillery and rockets pounded defensive bunkers. Major General Moshe Peld, commanding the northern front, surveyed the barren slopes of Mount Hermon and the surrounding basalt hills. His troops, exhausted, had fought against overwhelming odds for 3 days, yet they had slowed the Syrian advance. For the soldiers of the 7th Armored Brigade and the 188th Armored Brigade, each day was a test of endurance and courage. Crews slept in trenches, emerging only to fire or repair tanks. Communications were intermittent. Dust and smoke clogged radios. Meanwhile, across the Sinai Peninsula, the situation was no less desperate. Egyptian bridgeheads were firmly established on the east bank of the Suez Canal, protected by lines of SAM missiles and artillery. Initial Israeli counterattacks had been repelled, often at heavy cost. On the Bar-Lev line, Israeli officers like Colonel Amnon Reshef organized defensive pockets, attempting to disrupt Egyptian supply lines while buying time for larger Israeli forces to mobilize. Into this tense environment stepped Ariel Sharon, the flamboyant and bold reserve general whose reputation was built on daring and improvisation. Sharon had been called to the front to coordinate a decisive counteroffensive. His goal: cross the canal at a strategic point near the Great Bitter Lake, cut into the rear of Egyptian forces, and disrupt their bridgeheads. On October 10, Sharon's forces began reconnaissance. Using outdated maps, limited intelligence, and a mix of regular and reserve troops, he identified a route through difficult terrain, a path that would later become legendary as the site of the Chinese farm battle. The farm itself, a small cluster of agricultural plots along the canal, became a choke point. Its irrigation ditches and orchards transformed into killing fields. The fighting at the Chinese farm, October 15-16, was brutal. Egyptian engineers, aware of the Israeli push, planted mines and defended key positions with anti-tank guns. Israeli armored columns advanced under intense artillery fire. Tanks were destroyed at close range, and crews were killed in the cab or forced to flee on foot. Yet Sharon persisted, using a combination of feints, artillery coordination, and sheer audacity. His divisions broke through, establishing a foothold on the east bank of the canal. Simultaneously, in the north, Israeli counterattacks on the Golan Heights intensified. Major engagements unfolded near Quneitra and Mount Hermon, where Zivika Greengold and other tank commanders executed daring maneuvers to slow Syrian advances. Over 1,000 tanks clashed in a series of brutal engagements. Israeli paratroopers and mechanized infantry launched flanking operations, often against superior numbers. Despite the ferocity of the fighting, Israeli forces regained portions of lost territory, pushing Syrian units back toward pre-war lines. By October 1112, in Sinai, the war was equally dynamic. Israeli forces, now fully mobilized, launched a larger counteroffensive aimed at halting Egyptian gains. Using the 101st Armored Division and units from the Armored Corps, Israel attempted to strike the Egyptian Third Army's supply lines. Air support, although limited by SAM coverage, targeted bridges, pontoon crossings, and logistical depots. Each successful strike delayed Egyptian reinforcements and slowed their consolidation of the East Bank. By October 13, Israel's combined efforts in both theaters were beginning to turn the tide. On the Golan, Syrian units were fatigued and stretched thin. Their armored formations were counterattacked repeatedly, and many tanks were destroyed or abandoned. On the Sinai front, Sharon's audacious maneuver had opened the possibility of encircling the Egyptian Third Army, a move that would alter the strategic calculus of the war. The operation to encircle the Third Army required coordination, precision, and extraordinary bravery. Israeli engineers worked under fire to construct temporary bridges across flooded canals, allowing tanks and infantry to pour into the Egyptian rear. Paratroopers secured high ground, preventing Egyptian reinforcements from reaching the front lines. Artillery units provided covering fire, often in dangerous proximity to advancing Israeli forces. During these days, the human cost was staggering. Soldiers from both sides endured artillery barrages, tank duels, and close-quarters combat. Egyptian units, exhausted from 3 days of fighting and the arduous canal crossing, were forced to hold their positions under constant Israeli assault. Syrian soldiers, isolated in the Golan Heights, faced encirclement and aerial attacks. Israeli troops, though better supplied and motivated, suffered casualties in numbers that shocked the nation. Nearly 2,000 dead and several thousand wounded in the first week alone. Among the notable acts of heroism was Sivika Gringold, who, in a single day, held off a Syrian tank column with just a handful of vehicles, delaying their advance long enough for reinforcements to stabilize the line. His actions became legendary within Israel and were later studied in military academies around the world as examples of improvisation and courage under fire. In Sinai, the Chinese farm battle exemplified the war's chaos and complexity. Israeli forces, pushing through irrigated fields and orchards, faced a web of Egyptian defenses, minefields, artillery, and entrenched infantry. Commanders often made decisions based on incomplete information. Tanks navigated through ditches and irrigation canals. Infantry fought from within groves of trees, and engineers detonated explosives to clear paths for armored vehicles. By October 16, Israeli forces had successfully crossed the canal and penetrated into the Egyptian rear, setting the stage for the encirclement of the Third Army. Meanwhile, Egyptian commanders faced agonizing decisions. Defense Minister Ahmed Ismail Ali and Chief of Staff Saad El-Shazli realized that Israeli breakthroughs could trap large portions of their forces. Resupply was difficult under constant Israeli air and artillery strikes. Despite these challenges, Egyptian units displayed discipline and tenacity, holding their bridgeheads and preventing a complete collapse. Back in Israel, Prime Minister Golda Meir, Defense Minister Moshe Dayan, and Chief of Staff David Elazar monitored the evolving situation with a mixture of anxiety and relief. The initial shock of the war had passed, but the fight was far from over. Every hour of progress on the Golan and Sinai fronts represented lives saved and territory regained. Yet every casualty weighed heavily on the leadership and the families waiting anxiously at home. By the third week of fighting, Israeli forces had established a continuous front across the Golan Heights and had successfully crossed into the Egyptian rear near the Great Bitter Lake. The encirclement of the Third Army was nearly complete. Egyptian supply lines were cut, and the Third Army faced shortages of fuel, ammunition, and food. Despite being trapped, Egyptian forces continued to resist fiercely, demonstrating the determination that Sadat had cultivated in his army over years of preparation. The strategic implications were enormous. Israel's success in crossing the canal and threatening the Egyptian rear forced Sadat and his commanders into a defensive posture. At the same time, Syrian advances in the north were being pushed back, signaling that the initial momentum of the Arab offensives had stalled. For the first time since the war began, Israel began to feel that a path to regaining the initiative had emerged. Yet the fighting was far from over. Every step forward required careful planning, courage, and endurance. Soldiers on both sides endured extreme exhaustion, harsh desert conditions, and constant fear of death. Battles were fought in close proximity, with infantry, armor, and artillery interacting in chaotic, deadly patterns. Medical units struggled to treat the wounded while under fire, and commanders faced impossible choices: advance and risk annihilation, or hold and risk being overrun. The first week and a half of the war had already reshaped the strategic landscape. The initial Egyptian and Syrian successes had demonstrated the effectiveness of careful planning, surprise, and determination. Israel's counteroffensives, particularly in the Sinai under Ariel Sharon, and in the Golan under Moshe Peld and Zivika Gringold, showed resilience, tactical ingenuity, and the importance of rapid mobilization. By the end of October 16, the war had entered a new phase. Israeli forces had regained much of the lost ground in the Golan, and the Third Army in the Sinai was effectively encircled. The battle lines were set for the coming days. Israel poised to consolidate gains, Egypt attempting to hold the bridgeheads, and Syria reorganizing after its initial setbacks. The stage was now set for the superpower involvement, diplomacy, and the eventual ceasefire that would define the war's political and military legacy. The Yom Kippur War, which had begun with surprise and devastation, was transforming into a contest of endurance, skill, and courage. Soldiers, commanders, and civilians alike faced the full intensity of modern warfare, where every decision could mean life or death, victory or defeat. And yet, amid the chaos, stories of heroism, sacrifice, and human endurance shone through, ensuring that the memory of these battles would echo for decades to come. By October 17, 1973, the war had reached a new, tense phase. Israeli forces had regained lost ground on the Golan Heights and successfully crossed into the Egyptian rear in the Sinai, threatening to encircle the Egyptian Third Army. Yet, the war was no longer a purely regional conflict. The eyes of the superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union, were now fixed firmly on the Middle East. In Washington, D.C., President Richard Nixon and his National Security Advisor, Henry Kissinger, monitored events with mounting concern. The rapid Israeli advances in Sinai and Golan, combined with the massive casualties, threatened to draw the Soviet Union directly into the conflict. The Soviets were supplying Egypt and Syria with equipment and advisors. Any further escalation could risk a confrontation between nuclear-armed powers. Nixon approved the start of Operation Nickel Grass, a massive airlift of military supplies, tanks, artillery, ammunition, and spare parts to Israel. The operation was unprecedented in scale, stretching American logistical capabilities to the limit. Across the Atlantic, the Soviet Union mobilized its own response. Military advisors in Cairo and Damascus urged commanders to hold positions and requested additional hardware. Soviet intelligence reported Israeli troop movements, and Moscow issued veiled threats to both Washington and Jerusalem. The war had transformed from a regional conflict into a high-stakes proxy confrontation, where every maneuver could have far-reaching consequences. As the airlift continued, Israeli forces pushed deeper into the Sinai. Ariel Sharon's armored divisions, having crossed the canal, now threatened to cut off the Egyptian Third Army entirely, isolating hundreds of thousands of troops east of the canal. Egyptian commanders, including Defense Minister Ahmed Ismail Ali and Chief of Staff Saad el-Shazli, realized that their forces faced encirclement. Supplies were dwindling, and the morale of soldiers, while still resilient, was being tested to its limits. Meanwhile, Syrian forces on the Golan Heights were reorganizing. They had been pushed back from several key positions, but reinforcements were arriving. Israeli commanders, wary of overextending, consolidated gains and prepared for counterattacks. The fighting remained brutal. Tank duels, artillery barrages, and infantry assaults continued across rugged terrain. The human cost was mounting. Thousands of soldiers on both sides had fallen. Civilians in northern Israel were enduring air raids, and those in Egypt and Syria faced bombardments near front lines. The war's global dimension became even more evident when Arab states began to wield the oil weapon. On October 17, the Organization of Arab Petroleum Exporting Countries, OAPEC, announced an embargo against nations supporting Israel, primarily targeting the United States and its allies. Oil prices quadrupled in the following weeks, causing economic panic in Western countries and highlighting the geopolitical stakes beyond the battlefield. The embargo added diplomatic urgency. Western powers sought a resolution before the conflict triggered a wider economic and political crisis. At the United Nations, emergency meetings convened. Diplomats from the US, USSR, Britain, France, and other nations negotiated resolutions demanding ceasefires and troop withdrawals. Both Israel and the Arab states resisted immediate compliance, each believing that their military position could be leveraged for a better post-war settlement. Behind the scenes, Kissinger engaged in shuttle diplomacy, traveling between Washington, Tel Aviv, Cairo, and Damascus to broker agreements and prevent escalation into a broader superpower confrontation. Back on the battlefield, the Israeli counteroffensives in Sinai reached a critical juncture. By October 20, Israeli forces had effectively encircled the Egyptian Third Army, cutting off supply lines and leaving hundreds of thousands of Egyptian soldiers trapped east of the Suez Canal. Egyptian commanders faced agonizing choices: attempt a breakout under fire, negotiate a ceasefire, or risk destruction. The situation was compounded by ongoing Israeli air superiority, artillery barrages, and coordinated tank maneuvers that left few options for relief. The fighting in the Sinai was marked by acts of extraordinary courage on both sides. Egyptian soldiers fought to defend their positions despite encirclement, improvising defensive lines and using the terrain to their advantage. Israeli troops, under the leadership of commanders like Sharon and Raphael Eitan, pushed relentlessly, coordinating tank columns, artillery, and infantry assaults to maintain the strategic advantage. Close quarters combat in villages, orchards, and along canal banks created chaos, confusion, and enormous casualties. On the Golan Heights, Israeli forces had regained much of the lost territory, but the situation remained tense. Syrian artillery continued to pound positions, and armored units regrouped for possible counterattacks. Israeli tank crews, infantry, and paratroopers dug in, aware that the Syrian forces had not been decisively defeated and could resume offensive operations if given the opportunity. Throughout this period, the international pressure intensified. The U.S. airlift, while sustaining Israeli forces, also risked provoking Soviet action. On several occasions, Soviet ships transported military equipment closer to the region, while their advisors in Egypt and Syria urged counteroffensives to regain lost ground. Washington and Moscow exchanged diplomatic warnings, raising fears of escalation. In the background, the nuclear dimension of the Cold War hovered as a constant threat, though thankfully it remained untriggered. By October 22, Israeli forces in Sinai had consolidated positions around the encircled Egyptian Third Army. Supplies were cut, communications were restricted, and Egyptian forces faced increasing pressure. The human toll was immense. Soldiers trapped in the pocket endured artillery fire, air attacks, and shortages of food, water, and medical care. Israeli troops, while controlling the situation, also suffered casualties in repeated skirmishes to secure their lines and prevent Egyptian attempts to break out. Simultaneously, diplomatic efforts gained momentum. Kissinger intensified shuttle diplomacy, negotiating with Sadat, Meir, and Assad to move toward a ceasefire. Both the United States and the Soviet Union feared that continued fighting could spiral into full-scale superpower conflict. By late October, both sides agreed to the framework of a UN-mediated ceasefire, contingent on withdrawal from key territories and assurances for both military and civilian safety. The oil embargo added a final, urgent lever for diplomacy. Western nations, facing economic disruption, pressured the U.S. government to secure an end to hostilities. The combination of battlefield developments, superpower involvement, and economic pressures created a complex environment where military and diplomatic strategies were inseparable. Despite the looming ceasefire, combat remained intense through the final days. Israeli forces continued to press their advantage in Sinai, while maintaining pressure on Syrian forces in the north. Egyptian units in the Third Army pocket held their ground under extreme conditions, demonstrating discipline, resilience, and courage in the face of encirclement. The last major clashes in this phase involved coordinated Israeli operations to strengthen positions along the Suez Canal, prevent Egyptian breakthroughs, and secure logistical lines. On the Golan, Israeli forces advanced cautiously to reclaim strategic heights, secure towns, and neutralize artillery positions. These final battles, though smaller in scale than the initial offensives, were critical in shaping post-war negotiations and ensuring that Israel would enter the ceasefire from a position of strength. By October 24-25, preliminary agreements were in place. Forces on both sides were instructed to hold positions and prepare for disengagement under UN supervision. The human toll was evident everywhere. Towns in northern Israel bore the scars of artillery fire. Villages in the Golan had been evacuated or destroyed, and tens of thousands of soldiers were dead, wounded, or missing. Medical teams worked tirelessly, often under fire, to treat the wounded, evacuate prisoners, and maintain morale. The Yom Kippur War, which had begun as a sudden, shocking assault on the holiest day of the Jewish calendar, had expanded into a complex theater of modern warfare with global ramifications. Strategic brilliance, courage, and endurance were tested on every front, while diplomacy, superpower intervention, and economic pressures combined to shape the outcome. The battles had been fought not only with tanks, artillery, and aircraft, but with strategy, improvisation, and human resilience. As the ceasefire approached, both sides understood that the war had transformed perceptions, alliances, and the political landscape. Israel had demonstrated that despite initial setbacks, its military could recover and achieve strategic gains. Egypt and Syria had shown that careful planning and surprise could inflict significant damage and alter the psychological and political dimensions of conflict. The role of superpowers and the shadow of the oil embargo had further reinforced the global significance of the conflict. The stage was now set for the final resolution: withdrawal, negotiation, and reflection on the war's costs. For soldiers, commanders, civilians, and leaders alike, the coming weeks would define the post-war reality, from political accountability to national trauma, from heroism to tragedy. By October 25, 1973, the thunder of artillery and the roar of tanks began to subside across the battlefields of Sinai and the Golan Heights. The United Nations brokered ceasefire, known as UN Security Council Resolution 338, had been implemented, halting the immediate bloodshed, but leaving the region tense and unstable. Israeli forces, though battered, held strategic positions along both fronts, while Egyptian and Syrian armies, weary and demoralized, stabilized lines awaiting diplomatic resolution. The ceasefire marked the end of active combat, but did not instantly ease the suffering. Across northern Israel, the scars of war were visible in towns hit by Syrian artillery. In the Sinai, Egyptian troops remained trapped in the encircled Third Army, their fate uncertain until negotiations could secure supplies and safe withdrawal. Hospitals in Cairo, Tel Aviv, and Haifa overflowed with wounded soldiers, many of whom had endured brutal desert conditions, shrapnel injuries, and burns from armored engagements. Within Israel, Prime Minister Golda Meir and Defense Minister Moshe Dayan faced the delicate task of addressing both the military and public consequences of the war. Though Israel had successfully pushed back the Syrian offensive and achieved the strategic encirclement of Egyptian forces, the initial surprise and high casualties had shaken national confidence. Tens of thousands of soldiers were killed, wounded, or missing. Families mourned, communities grieved, and the public demanded accountability. The Agranat Commission, established to investigate Israel's preparedness and military intelligence failures, began its work shortly after the war. Its mission was to examine the intelligence lapses that had allowed Egypt and Syria to achieve surprise, as well as the performance of the IDF's high command during the first critical days of fighting. In private, Meir and Dayan debated policy decisions, reflecting on the tension between political caution and military necessity. Publicly, Israel hailed its eventual successes, but privately, the nation grappled with the deep shock of vulnerability. On the battlefield, the human stories of courage, endurance, and sacrifice remained vivid. In the Golan, tank crews who had fought against overwhelming odds were slowly rotating out, many suffering from trauma, burns, and shell shock. Zivika Greengold, whose heroic stand had delayed the Syrian advance, returned to a nation celebrating his courage, but burdened by the losses of comrades. Paratroopers and infantry units recounted their nights of digging trenches under fire, their survival often dependent on split-second decisions. In Sinai, the encircled Egyptian Third Army was a study in endurance. Commanders like Saad el-Shazli and Ahmed Ismail Ali coordinated supply drops under the supervision of UN observers. Egyptian soldiers, trapped and isolated, demonstrated remarkable discipline, repelling Israeli probing attacks and conserving dwindling resources. The eventual disengagement, facilitated by diplomatic intervention, allowed many to withdraw with honor, preserving morale and maintaining the cohesion of Egypt's military for future conflicts. International diplomacy played a decisive role in the final phase of the war. Kissinger's shuttle diplomacy reached its peak as he negotiated both disengagement agreements and the groundwork for subsequent peace talks. Israel agreed to pull back from portions of the Sinai under phased arrangements, while Egypt and Syria accepted conditions designed to prevent renewed hostilities. These diplomatic efforts, delicate and tense, prevented a broader superpower confrontation and laid the foundation for the Camp David process. A few years later, the human cost of the war was staggering. By official estimates, Israel lost approximately 2,800 soldiers, while Egypt suffered between 8,000 and 15,000 casualties, and Syria sustained roughly 505,000 deaths. Tens of thousands were wounded. Civilian populations endured displacement, infrastructure destruction, and the psychological trauma of aerial bombardment, artillery, and invasion. Yet, amid the tragedy, stories of solidarity, resilience, and heroism persisted. Soldiers saved comrades under fire. Medical teams worked tirelessly to evacuate and treat the wounded, and civilians volunteered to assist families and communities affected by the conflict. Politically, the war reshaped leadership and strategy in Israel. Golda Meir faced mounting criticism for perceived unpreparedness, while military leaders underwent intense scrutiny. The Agranat Commission ultimately led to the resignation of Chief of Staff David Elazar, while reinforcing the principle that accountability and readiness were paramount. In Egypt, Anwar Sadat leveraged the partial military success and the eventual ceasefire to bolster national pride and demonstrate that Egypt could challenge Israeli supremacy, setting the stage for future negotiations and the historic peace process. the war also had lasting geopolitical ramifications. The Arab oil embargo introduced new global economic pressures, demonstrating the interconnection between regional conflicts and world markets. Superpower involvement highlighted the delicate balance of the Cold War. Direct confrontation was narrowly avoided, but the risk had been real. Both Washington and Moscow recognized the need for careful diplomacy to prevent escalation in future crises. For soldiers returning home, the transition was both relief and challenge. Psychological scars lingered. Battle-hardened troops struggled to reintegrate into civilian life. Families welcomed them with joy, but also faced the sobering reality of the losses sustained. Memoirs, letters, and oral histories from veterans captured the intensity, fear, and heroism of those days, preserving memories for future generations. Lessons of the war were manifold. Militarily, it underscored the dangers of overconfidence, the critical importance of intelligence, and the necessity of rapid mobilization and reserve integration. Strategically, it demonstrated that careful planning, bold maneuvers, and adaptability could achieve success even after early setbacks. Politically, it illustrated that wars could have profound domestic and international consequences, reshaping alliances, public opinion, and economic conditions. By November 1973, Israel had begun phased withdrawals from parts of the Sinai as part of disengagement agreements monitored by the United Nations. Egyptian forces returned to positions west of the canal, while Israel retained strategic defensive depth. The Golan Heights remained under Israeli control, providing a buffer against future Syrian aggression. The ceasefire held, though tensions persisted in the months that followed, laying the groundwork for future peace negotiations. The Yom Kippur War became a defining moment for Israel and the Arab world. For Israel, it was a humbling reminder of vulnerability, a crucible in which national resilience and military ingenuity were tested. For Egypt and Syria, it demonstrated that carefully executed offensives could challenge perceived military superiority, and that diplomacy and international pressure could influence outcomes. Ultimately, the war left a legacy of heroism, tragedy, and transformation. Soldiers and civilians alike endured extraordinary hardship. Commanders faced impossible choices. Leaders navigated diplomacy under the shadow of global tension. And the memory of those intense 18 days of fighting remained etched in national consciousness, studied in military academies, memorialized in ceremonies, and recounted in stories of bravery and sacrifice. As Israel lit the menorahs for Hanukkah that year, and Egypt commemorated the victory in the October War, the world understood that the Yom Kippur War was more than a battle for territory. It was a struggle of endurance, strategy, courage, and human spirit. A reminder that even in the most devastating conflicts, the resilience of people shapes history.